Numbers are fun, y'all, and we have some really fun numbers to look at courtesy of the Pro Play Summit in Denver, Colorado. So Fabled has been out for about 3 weeks now, and things are kind of settling in. We've had some major events, including the PPG, or Pro Play Summit in Denver, Colorado, where it was the first time players had to compete for a shot at qualifying for the North American Continental Championship. Now, Amber Steel came out on top, but there's some really fun things that happened in the tournament, some really fun numbers. I can't wait to take a look. Let's do a data deep dive. So all these numbers will be based on the publicly available data on inkdecks.com. At the time of us pulling this data, there were 269 decks available, which is a little short of the actual number of competitors, but it's not that far off, and it gives us a pretty good sample size. So let's start by taking a look at the meta share, and it is exactly what you thought it was. As far as ink pairings go, Amethyst Sapphire, or Blurple, is the most represented deck with 32% or 85 decks. Right below that, Amethyst Steel with 23% or 62 decks, Emerald Sapphire at 17%, Amber Steel at 15%, and then you have Sapphire Steel at just under 4%, with other decks representing 10% of the meta. Now, what this means is that Amethyst is really popular. How popular? 60% popular, or 59%. So 159 decks out of the 269, 59% were running Amethyst. But right beneath that is Sapphire at 53%. So everybody talks about how this is an Amethyst meta, but Sapphire is right there at 53%. Just below that is Steel with 43%, Emerald 23%, Amber at 19%, and poor Ruby. Poor Ruby.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
At around 3% with just 8 decks. Ruby is really struggling with Be Prepared being gone, Sisu, some of the other big removal answers and cards that it had. So Ruby almost disappearing from the meta, but there's a few people trying to make it work. So yeah, just 8. Out of 15 possible color combinations, 12 of them appeared somewhere at the tournament, but there's 3 that were completely absent according to Index. One is Ruby Steel, one is Ruby Emerald, and the last is Amber Amethyst, which is super interesting because Amethyst Amber always had representation at a lot of these tournaments as the hyper aggro variant, but it lost some tools or people going hyper aggro or moving into a different color. So that one was a little surprising to see it not represented at all. Now, looking at the most popular decks, initially this was described as a rock, paper, scissors meta, with Blurple, Amethyst Steel, and Amber Steel being the rock, paper, and scissors. But Emerald Sapphire kind of made a big appearance, and it actually outpaced Amber Steel as the third most popular deck. And so what was a rock, paper, scissors meta is now more of a square meta, which is super interesting. So while it's super fun to take a look at the decks at the top end of the meta, sometimes it's also fun to take a look at the 1 or 2 off decks that people had fun with or tried to make work. And a couple people brought in some interesting stuff. There was one racer deck piloted by a player named Blake. This is the Ruby Amber deck full of Sugar Rush racers. There also was an Amber Sapphire deck piloted by William Hauber, just one of. It didn't do too well, but we liked seeing you try to make it work. It was a one of. One day those color combinations will be good.
A few moments later.
Ruby Sapphire players are really disappointed in this current meta, but there's a couple people who tried to make it work, bringing in Maui Sharks and some other favorites from the Ruby Sapphire lists. Just 2 of them. Good job trying to make them work. They didn't do too well, but also outside of those, the spiciest deck in traditional color combos was a Sapphire Steel deck piloted by Cade Mitchell. It had some interesting cards like Maid Marian, the badminton player, Arthur Determined Squire, and Lady Cluck Protective Confident. Wasn't near the top, but it was pretty spicy, and we appreciate you trying to make it work. Now, let's take a look at the cards that were the most common at the tournament. The most played card at this tournament was, can you guess it? I'll bet you can. It's Genie Wish Fulfilled. Now, this is a 4 of in most Amethyst decks, and with 60% of the meta being Amethyst, these Genies were everywhere with 622 copies. Now, most people were running 4 of, but the average was actually 3.9 copies per deck, so some people either didn't have them or chose not to run them, but most people had 4 of. And in a meta full of Genies, you also want Elsa's. That was the second most played card, Elsa the Fifth Spirit, with 618 copies. Just below that was Tipo Growing Sun with 563 copies, representing Sapphire. Beneath that, we're back to Amethyst with Dumbo, ninth wonder of the universe with 549 copies. And lastly, Sail the Azurite Sea is staple in any ramp deck with 548 copies. So those are the most played cards overall, but let's dive into Fabled for a second. Let's take a look at the most common reprinted cards and the most common new cards. For reprints, you probably won't be surprised. The number one reprinted card played at this tournament was Hades' Infernal Schemer with 491 copies. This is a reprint all the way back from set 1. Right after that, it's Bell Accomplished Mystic with 477 copies. Beneath that, Strength of a Raging Fire, a card Frank Karsten called the most powerful card in this set with 451 copies. After Strength, we're dropping from 491 copies down to 292. It's Develop Your Brain, and then Rafiki Mystical Fighter coming in at 235 copies. So if those were the most popular reprinted cards, what are the most popular new cards that we're seeing for the first time in Fabled? Well, number one is not going to surprise anybody. It's Dumbo, ninth wonder of the universe. This is a card that every Amethyst deck wants. Most people had him. There were 549 copies in the room. Dumbo was everywhere. Next up, it's Steel with Nala, Undot, and Lioness at 175 copies. This is a card that slots really nicely into the Piglet slot in these Amber Steel aggro decks. This card was on some people's radars prior to the release of Fabled, but I would argue most people didn't realize how popular Nala would be, and she is everywhere right now. Beneath that, we're in Amber with Aurora Holding Court at 115 copies. Beneath that, over to Emerald with Bobby Zamersky at 112 copies. And lastly, Lilo, Best Explorer Ever, is the fifth most popular new card at 47 copies. So let's put a spotlight on the Flying Elephant for just a moment. There were 159 Amethyst decks in the room, and with the number of Dumbos there, that represents about 3.45 Dumbos per deck. So not everybody was running all four. Now, this is because some people choose to run 3, but I'm also willing to bet that there's a number of people that just couldn't find the Dumbos that they needed prior to the event. Overall, there were about 87 Dumbo slots left empty, or roughly 13.7% of the possible maximum. Now, here's something fun to think about. Let's talk about value. If each Dumbo was worth about $60 when the players acquired them, and with the number of Dumbos in the room, there were $33,000 worth of Dumbo cards in that room during the tournament, which is a lot. That's one expensive elephant. So overall, in the room of about 300 players, there were only 4 cards that topped 600 copies total, and that was Genie, Elsa, Tipo, and Dumbo. But there were also some one-off curiosities. I dug into the different numbers and tried to find cards that there were only one of in the room just for fun, and I found a few. One is Ink Geyser with only 1 copy. Robin Hood Timely Contestant saw 1 copy during competitive play. Fred Major Science Enthusiast had 1 copy. And finally, Most Everyone is Mad Here saw 1 copy in a Ruby build. So what are the big takeaways for me? Well, it is an Amethyst meta. I think we all knew that coming into this set. Amethyst has evasion, card draw, and some removal, as well as some catch-up mechanics, so Amethyst is very, very popular. But if Amethyst is popular at 59%, Sapphire's right behind it at 53%. The rise of Emerald Sapphire means Sapphire is almost as common as Amethyst, which is really fascinating. It has ramp, it has removal, and it has plenty of cards like Develop Your Brain to filter through your deck and find the cards that you need, so it's no surprise to see it sticking around. Genie and Elsa are still an incredible 1-2 punch on turns 4 and 5, or 3 and 4 if you're playing Blurple. They were good before, they are even better now in this meta, and they're one of the reasons that Amethyst is so popular. Next, it is really fascinating to see just how far Ruby has fallen out of favor with rotation. It was always one of the most represented colors with Ruby Amethyst or Ruby Sapphire, and now representing just 3% of the meta, or 8 decks. And actually, it's not even fair to say it's 3% of the meta, because some of those decks were one-off fun decks like Racer decks, so it really has completely vanished from the meta. Now, it needs just a few more cards to make it good, really just some removal tools, and I will say, I think that the cards that are really going to make it go off are the Powerline combo. You give Ruby a couple good songs that Powerline can sing, and this deck could be incredible. There were a few people trying to make Powerline work this weekend with like 2 or 3 Powerline decks, but it just didn't click. Ruby is a tragic tale of rotation, but I'm sure we're going to see it back again soon. We'll see. Next, the Emerald Tempo decks really kind of disappeared. Emerald Steel was represented, as was Emerald Amethyst, but really Emerald is mostly seen paired with Sapphire in these Clarabelle builds. And I don't know, there are cards like Genie, which everybody thought would be good this set, but Emerald Tempo seems to be missing one or two of the cards that really makes it work. So looking forward to see Emerald back again. And finally, Dumbo is just as good as everybody thought he was. He's everywhere, he's expensive, and he's not going anywhere probably anytime soon. So get your Dumbos while you can. Here's the thing, the card might not be that powerful, but in a world full of Amethyst mirrors, Dumbo gives you a significant edge, and he really is one of those mirror breaker cards. So everybody wants him, everybody needs him, and his price reflects that. So if you got him, great. If not, so that's your data deep dive from the PPG Summit in Denver, Colorado. Which of these numbers surprised you? Which of these numbers are tragic? And which of these numbers are you glad to see? Let us know in the comments below. And what would you like us to deep dive next?